All right, I think we are ready to get started. So thank you everyone for taking the time to be here tonight for this meeting. My name is Chelsea Payne with Ascent, and we are the consulting team that's assisting city staff with this housing element update. We are still in the early stages of drafting the housing element, and we're here tonight to introduce the project and hear your initial ideas about what you feel needs to be addressed in the city's housing plan. With me here tonight from Ascent, I have Jamie, who's helping to run logistics, and I have Kevin, Rebecca, and Kim. They're all going to be helping with different aspects of running the meeting tonight. And Jenny, would you like to start with introductions of city staff?
Yes, thanks, Chelsea. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here tonight. I'm Jenny Carloni. I'm the city's housing officer. Tonight with city staff joining me, we have Trudy Ryan, our director of community development. We have Ryan Dyson, our housing specialist, Ernie DeFrenchi, our affordable housing manager, and Edith Alanis, our housing programs technician.
All right, great. Thanks, Jenny. So next slide, please, Jamie. Before we begin, if you prefer to listen to this presentation tonight in Spanish, we have an interpreter, and that interpreter is going to be available on the interpretation channel. So to listen to Spanish audio, look at the bottom of your screen in the control panel. On the right-hand side is a globe icon labeled interpretation. Click this option and then choose Spanish. And then to mute the English audio of the meeting, choose mute original audio. I'm now going to ask Carmen to give these instructions in Spanish.
Buenas tardes a todos. Si usted necesita interpretación, usted va a mirar en la parte de abajo de su pantalla un globo que dice interpretación. Va a seleccionar el idioma y va a hacerle clic al audio original y luego va a escuchar la traducción en español. Si usted utiliza un teléfono inteligente, por favor seleccione la parte que dice idioma y luego seleccione su lenguaje y luego hágale clic a esta parte donde dice audio original.
All right, thank you very much, Carmen. So I'm going to try to speak a little slower tonight because our interpreters are going to be providing simultaneous translation. Also, if you have any questions while I'm giving the presentation, please use the Q&A in your control panel at the bottom of the screen. And we'll take these questions at the end of the presentation as time permits. So in tonight's presentation, I'm going to provide an overview of the project. I'm going to highlight our upcoming community engagement events and talk about some key components of the housing element, including the fair housing assessment and the sites inventory. But you're not just here tonight to hear from me. We want this to be an interactive meeting. So throughout the presentation, we'll be stopping to ask you, our audience, various questions, and we'll be using a polling program to get your feedback at those various points. So stay tuned. We're gonna be interrupting my presentation here with some interactive polling. Next slide, please. So first, what is the housing element? The housing element is an element or a chapter of the city's general plan. The general plan is a document that guides decisions about how the city will develop. And the housing element looks at housing needs in the city, and it's a policy document that guides the city's actions related to housing development, programs, and related services. While the housing element focuses on meeting the housing needs of current residents of Sunnyvale, it's also the city's plan for how it will accommodate its fair share of the future regional housing need. Every city and county in California is required to have a housing element and to update it every 8 years according to a state mandated schedule. And the state mandated adoption deadline for this update is January 31st, 2023. Unlike other elements of the city's general plan, there are very detailed requirements in state law for what has to be addressed in the housing element. And the housing element is also the only element that's reviewed and certified by the state for compliance with state law. And the state department that's responsible for that compliance review is called HCD, or the Department of Housing and Community Development. Next slide, please. There's a lot of information that goes into the housing element document. We start by conducting a housing needs assessment to describe the housing needs of city residents. And this includes residents with low incomes, seniors, people with disabilities, people experiencing homelessness, and other residents with special needs. There's a new requirement to conduct a fair housing assessment to understand if there are issues related to housing discrimination, segregation, or unequal access to opportunities. We evaluate the effectiveness of the programs in the existing housing element to determine which programs to carry forward, which programs to modify. We conduct a detailed inventory of all of the available housing sites in the city, and we do this at a parcel level. So there's a lot of information about all of the individual available sites. We also look at potential constraints to housing in an effort to try to reduce barriers to housing development. And then based on all of our analysis and input from the community, we update the goals, policies, and implementation programs to address the housing needs. So before I go any further with that overview, we're now going to break for polling. I'm going to ask Kevin to give our instructions for our Slido polling.
Good evening, everyone. Now we're going to take a break for a couple of instant polling questions. To participate, you can either open a web browser, such as Google Chrome, Firefox, or Microsoft Edge, and go to slido.com. You could advance to the next slide, please. There you go. You see the website address on the slide currently. If you use a web browser and you're at the website, please enter the number you see on the screen, 277639. If you're on a phone tonight and you'd like to participate, you can use the camera to look at the QR code, that box with the squiggly lines on it on the right-hand side, and it'll open a web browser too and prompt you to enter the code that's on the screen. If you have any trouble accessing the poll, just drop us a question in the Q&A and we'll do our best to troubleshoot. We'll just give a moment for folks to navigate there. As answers are entered, the screen will automatically update with responses so we can get a sense of. There we go.
All right, great. And we know that there's probably one or more of these descriptions that describes you, but please just answer as best you'd like about which statement best describes you. All right, and as expected, we have mostly residents of Sunnyvale here with us tonight. We have 29% of our participants that work in Sunnyvale, 7% that work at a nonprofit or an advocacy group. All right. I think we're probably ready to move on to the next. Right. Kevin, you want to read the next question?
Sure. The next question is, what is your housing situation?
All right, great. It looks like we have about 15 participants in the polling tonight. More than half own their home. That roughly tracks with ownership trends in the city. 33% are renters. We have 7% that own a mobile home. And then 7% live with family or friends. Great, thank you for sharing that.
All right, this one's so self-explanatory. Right? If we could get a sense of the age of our audience.
All right, we have a pretty good spread of folks here tonight from different age groups. We have an even split of participants 65 and older, also in 25 to 34, 31% each. 25% in the 50 to 64 age group and 13% in the 35 to 49. We do not have anyone 24 or younger here tonight. All right.
All right, next question. How long have you lived in Sunnyvale?
Okay, great. We see the answers coming in. We have a lot of people that have lived here for more than 10 years. 67%. We have 27% that do not live in Sunnyvale but work here. So that's great. Thank you for joining us tonight. And then 7% have lived here 1 to 4 years. And that's it for tonight. So a lot of longtime Sunnyvale residents here.
Right. Next question. What do you like about living and or working in Sunnyvale?
And this is just an open-ended question. Allows you to add whatever you'd like.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Great, we've got some great answers here about valuing diversity, the parks, safety, good jobs. I saw fairly boring. Diverse and safe city with lots of parks, welcoming community, like how clean it is. Everything, love the environment, convenience, people, government, safe city. It's a nice and safe place to live with everything you need. People are friendly. The city has good public policies, good transportation, diversity, great nearby businesses and restaurants, strong nonprofits, opportunity for development, housing, and new growth, great neighborhood, and the crows. Glad the crows made an appearance tonight. A delightful community. It works well, has great accessibility, and its government works really well. Has terrific diversity in housing that goes along with it. These are really wonderful responses. Okay, thank you all for sharing that. Okay. Great, and feel free to keep adding your responses to that question there. All right, and I think that is the last of our first set of polling questions. I'm going to now touch on some key facts from our existing conditions analysis. So part of the housing element, we do a very detailed analysis of existing housing trends and housing needs. And so these are some of these key facts. Until recently in Sunnyvale, detached single-family homes made up the largest proportion of the housing stock, with over 21,000 detached single-family homes. However, since 2010, the majority of new construction in Sunnyvale has been multifamily housing in larger apartment buildings. And so as of 2020, multifamily housing now makes up the majority of the housing stock in the city. As you all know, mobile homes are also an important part of the city's housing stock, making up more than 6% of the housing. Next slide, please. And as we all know, housing costs in California, particularly in the Silicon Valley, are some of the highest housing costs in the country. As of December 2018, the median sale price for single-family homes and condominiums in Sunnyvale was $1.8 million. And these housing costs in the city are generally comparable to housing costs in the region. The chart here compares the median home sales price in Sunnyvale, which is shown in green, with 6 other Santa Clara County cities. And the median sale price of $1.8 million in Sunnyvale is slightly higher than the median in San Jose, Santa Clara, and Campbell, but lower than the median price in Mountain View, Cupertino, and Palo Alto. It takes an income of about $370,000 a year for a sale price of $1.8 million to be considered an affordable home price. Next slide, please. As residents in Silicon Valley, Sunnyvale households have some of the highest housing costs in the nation, making it particularly hard for low-income and moderate-income households to afford to live here. About 27% of all households in Sunnyvale are paying more than 30% of their income on housing. And that's a percentage that's considered unaffordable. Jamie, if you could click the next button too. About 12% of all households are severely overpaying, meaning they're spending more than 50% of their income on housing. Overpayment is higher for renter households compared to owner households in the city. 33% of renters in Sunnyvale are overpaying for housing, while 25% of owners are overpaying. Next slide, please. So what do we mean by affordable housing? We're talking about housing that's affordable to your low, very low, and extremely low income households. And these income categories are determined based on the area median income and different household sizes. So a 4-person household with a gross annual income of $117,750 or less is considered a low-income household. And a household at this income level can afford to pay about $2,900 for housing each month. A 3-person household earning about $75,000 is considered very low income and can afford to pay about $1,800 a month for housing. Next slide, please. So who needs affordable housing? When we talk about low-income residents, who are we talking about? We're talking about people in the community that work in the trades and the service industry, your waiter or barista at your local coffee shop, your kids' teachers, your nurses, your firefighters, and also many seniors that are living on fixed income. So in a market where the median home sale price is $1.8 million, it's very challenging for the local workforce to live in the community. So we're going to pause now for just one quick polling question. Kevin, you want to pull that up? All right, well, I think we lost audio on Kevin, but the question we want to ask now is, what do you think are the greatest housing challenges in Sunnyvale? And this is an open-ended question. And just as a reminder, or if you joined the meeting late, You can join this poll by going to slido.com in your browser and entering the code 277639 or using the QR code to pull that up on your camera. So greatest housing challenges in Sunnyvale: affordability, cost affordability, not enough housing for everyone who wants to live here. Prices are very high for most people. We're seeing high prices, not enough housing stock, not enough density or height allowed. Affordability again, lack of housing affordable to low-income households, displacement of long-time residents due to an unaffordable rents. Affordability again, I hardly have nothing left to buy food and other necessities. Inventory, housing for people with developmental disabilities, many with very low income. Serving the housing needs of low to modest income residents and the cost to live in Sunnyvale as a renter or possible owner. NIMBY attitudes in South Sunnyvale neighborhoods, senior housing. Thank you, these are all great contributions. Anyone making less than, I think that says 200,000 a year cannot afford to live here. That's absurd. All right, thank you for all that feedback. See, housing costs, inventory, affordability is the top issues cited. All right, feel free to add more responses to that polling. We're going to pull back up the PowerPoint now. Thank you, Jamie. So next, I'm going to talk about one of the central pieces of the housing element, which is the fair share regional housing needs that are assigned to the city. Next slide, please. So in California, housing needs are assessed at a regional level based on projected population growth and other factors. And a regional housing target, it's called a determination, is assigned by the state, by HCD, to each region within California. And then the regional government, and in this region, that's ABAG, or the Association of Bay Area Governments, develops a methodology to distribute the regional housing needs to every jurisdiction. And this process is called the RHNA, R-H-N-A, RHNA. HCD assigned the ABAG region, the broader Bay Area region, over 440,000 housing units that are to be accommodated over the roughly 8-year planning period for this housing element. And based on the final methodology that was adopted by ABAG, Sunnyvale's portion of that broader regional housing need is about 12,000 housing units. 11,966 units have been assigned to the city of Sunnyvale. So this is the number of units that the city needs to plan to accommodate in this housing element update. And you can see here how this compares to some of the other cities in Santa Clara County. So Sunnyvale's RHNA is very similar to the cities of Santa Clara and Mountain View, and about double the RHNA for Palo Alto. Next slide, please. This nearly 12,000 housing unit target is broken down by the income levels that are shown here. You can also see how the RHNA for this housing element compares to your current housing element RHNA that's shown to the left. That's the RHNA for the 2015 to 2023 period. So the RHNA for this next housing element is more than double the current RHNA. It's 119% increase. For comparison, the city of Santa Clara's RHNA increased by 184%, Palo Alto's increased by 206%, and Mountain View's RHNA increased by 281%. So Sunnyvale is not alone in having to accommodate a much higher housing target within the region. Your lower income RHNA, which is collectively your very low and your low income categories combined, is about 39% of the city's total RENA. And these are the income categories that are really the hardest to meet. So a lot of the attention in the housing element and in the sites inventory is focused on how we're going to meet the lower income RENA. Next slide, please. One important factor in planning for housing is density. Typically, the higher the density, the more affordable the housing becomes. According to state law for Sunnyvale, sites that have zoning that allows for at least 30 units per acre can be counted as meeting the lower income RENA. And so at 30 units per acre, this is a density at which you start to get multifamily apartment complexes. Lower than 30 units per acre is more single family, maybe some attached single family, but 30 units per acre is roughly where you see multifamily apartments at the sort of the bottom density. Next slide, please. Ultimately, it isn't the city's job to actually build housing. The city has an obligation to plan for housing by making sure that it has the right zoning and infrastructure in place to provide adequate sites to accommodate the RENA, and by including a suite of programs in the housing element to facilitate housing production. The city has a number of different sites and strategies for how it's going to meet its RENA. These include approved projects that are in the pipeline to be built, specific plan areas like the Lawrence Station area and the downtown specific plan, and sites outside of the specific plan that are designated for residential in the city's general plan. We will also be counting a projection of accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, which are a housing type that is becoming increasingly popular in California. We also hope to rely on two other specific plans, the El Camino Real Corridor Plan and the Moffett Park Specific Plan. These plans are still being prepared and haven't yet been adopted, but we're hopeful that they will be adopted before the housing element and that we can use these plans to help accommodate the city's housing targets. Next slide, please. We've started to identify our inventory of vacant and underutilized sites that are available to accommodate the RENA. And we have not yet completed the inventory, but the draft housing element that we'll be publishing in the spring is going to contain a very detailed parcel-specific inventory that describes each of the available housing sites. So you'll see a map like this one in the housing element, and then very detailed information about each site and at which income level we are assuming that site will be built. So next slide, please. Another important consideration, specifically for the lower income housing inventory, is what's called no net loss. And this is a law that requires every jurisdiction in California to maintain lower income sites throughout the 8-year planning period. So for example, if a site is identified in the housing element as accommodating lower income housing, but is approved with fewer units or at a different income category, the city then has to essentially find a replacement site if there isn't enough remaining capacity in the housing element inventory. So the housing element is going to reflect that high density sites have the opportunity to accommodate lower income housing, but ultimately we know that market rate housing can be built on those sites as well. So it's going to be really important that the city build in a buffer of additional higher density housing capacity to make sure that there's enough opportunity to meet the lower income RENA over the whole 8-year planning period. Next slide, please. One of the most significant new requirements for this housing element update is the requirement to address fair housing. Next slide, please. Assembly Bill 686 adds new requirements to the housing element, but also more broadly affects the policies and programs of public agencies. Now, all public agencies in California must administer housing and community development programs in a manner that affirmatively furthers fair housing, or AFFH for short. And this means taking meaningful actions to combat discrimination, overcome patterns of segregation, and foster inclusive communities where everyone has equal access to opportunities. In the housing element, we're required to prepare a fair housing assessment that analyzes 5 categories of different topics. We look at fair housing enforcement and outreach capacity within the city, trends related to segregation and integration in the city and the broader region, racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty, as well as racially and ethnically concentrated areas of affluence. We analyze disparities in who has access to opportunity, and we look at disproportionate housing needs and displacement risk. We also need to evaluate the sites inventory to ensure that new lower income units are built in areas of opportunity, to ensure that lower income individuals and households have fair access to opportunity, things like education and economic resources. AB 686 is a really complex new law, and it has become the focus of the state's review during this housing element update. So in the draft housing element, you can expect to see a lot of focus on addressing this new fair housing requirement. The state is really looking for stronger policies and programs from all jurisdictions to change the status quo related to fair housing. Next slide, please. One of the key things we look at in the fair housing assessment is access to opportunity, both within the local jurisdiction, but also the broader region. Access to opportunity refers to geographic access to goods, resources, and services such as employment, education, and transportation that offers individuals, particularly low-income individuals, the best chance at economic advancement, at high education attainment, and good physical and mental health. When referring to access to opportunity, it's generally expressed as high resource or low resource. So areas of high resource, like those in the southern and central part of the city, have the highest access to educational, economic, and environmental opportunity for this indicator. Areas of moderate or lower resource include those in the northeastern and northern portions of the city. And this is data that's developed by the state of California for use in allocation of tax credit funding. Historically, affordable housing has been disproportionately developed in minority neighborhoods with higher poverty rates, creating a concentration of poverty and racial segregation in low opportunity and low resource areas. That's a trend that has been seen across California, across the nation. And so these new state laws have required cities to consider, how can we ensure equality of access to opportunity and help low-income residents and residents of color prosper. So through this housing element, the sites inventory and the policies and programs we develop will strive to address some of the fair housing issues in the city. Next slide, please. As you can see here, this graph shows the racial demographics of Sunnyvale by opportunity areas, those areas that were mapped on the previous slide. The data is showing that there's a high concentration of Hispanic and Latinx communities in low resource areas or areas characterized with high segregation and poverty. In comparison, Asian and white residents are the predominant groups in the high and highest resource areas. So this is one example of the disparities that we'll be looking for while we prepare the fair housing assessment. And the goal here is to achieve inclusion, communities that are economically and racially diverse, and provide more equal access to opportunities rather than continuing any patterns of disparity related to the placement of housing. Next slide, please. Another factor we'll be analyzing in the fair housing element is risk of displacement. And displacement is defined as the involuntary relocation of residents or businesses, and it can be caused by foreclosure, eviction, rent increase, or environmental catastrophes. And the map here shows areas that are considered by this data source to be sensitive to displacement. Those are areas shown in pink. Some neighborhoods that stand out here, the ones with mobile home parks and the downtown. And I know the city has policies in place, and we look at in the housing element ways to address the risks of displacement. Next slide, please. So we are going to move now to our next polling question related to fair housing. All right, thank you, Kevin, if you want to take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, at this point, if you wanted to join in the poll, again, you can go to slido.com, enter the code in the bottom left, or use your phone and use the QR code at the top left. And this answer is an open answer that you can enter once there to the question of what do you think are the greatest fair housing issues in Sunnyvale? If you would, find your way there and tell us what's on your mind.
So we see lack of affordable housing south of El Camino, lack of low and very low income units in new development. South Sunnyvale has more resources, including both high schools, not enough affordable housing for people with disabilities and low incomes. Landlords not accepting vulnerable populations, fewer good schools and shopping areas in North Sunnyvale. Lowest income people are people of color and people with disabilities who can least afford to live in Sunnyvale, and not enough housing or affordability. So thank you for those responses. Not being able to make enough money to pay rent, homelessness, correlation between low opportunity area and non-white residents, affordability to live in Sunnyvale and low income areas. All right, thank you for these responses and contributions. Feel free to add more to this answer. The income restrictions should be higher, need more housing for people with only Social Security income. All right, great, thank you very much. So we'll be providing a very detailed fair housing assessment where we dig into these issues some more and then work very closely with the city to develop policies and programs. Historical segregation and lack of housing in low resource areas also build all new housing in low resource areas. All right. Okay, thank you very much for that. All right, we're gonna bring it back for just a couple more slides and then we'll have our final poll and then we'll be available for Q&A. So if you have any questions that you'd like answered, don't forget to put them into the Q&A and we'll get to them in a minute. We'll also have time if you'd like to raise your hand and speak. We can do that here in just a few moments. So what has the city been doing to address housing? The city has already done a lot of work toward addressing its housing needs. Next slide, Jamie. The city adopted a housing strategy in 2020 and has started on the implementation. And this has included recent updates to the below market rate housing programs or the city's inclusionary requirements, a mobile home park rent stabilization, memorandum of understanding or MOU, and increased tenant protections that are currently in process of being developed. The city has also been updating or preparing specific plans that are to increase housing opportunities, and that includes the Lawrence Station area plan, the downtown specific plan, El Camino Real, which is currently in process, Moffett Park also currently in process, and then the Village Center's master plan in process. So the city's done a lot of planning around increased housing opportunities. And the city also continues to provide financial support for new affordable housing development. I mean, in 2020, the city provided $26 million for new affordable housing. And obviously there's a lot more that the city does and a lot of policies and programs that will be in the draft housing element. But we have our final polling question. So we'll pull that up here now. Kevin, if you want to get us going on that last question.
Thank you. If we could advance to the next slide. All right, our question is, what ideas do you have for addressing housing challenges in Sunnyvale? Again, this will populate with answers. Once you enter them, if you are not at slido.com, you can navigate there to a web browser and enter the code, or use the QR code again on the top left with your phone. Looks like we might need a minute or so for folks to get back. Here we go.
All right, we have our first response is don't be afraid to increase density and height, build much more housing and higher density housing. So to build more affordable homes, build with higher density and height to increase supply and reduce costs per unit, increase low, very low income unit requirements for all new development. It's talking about the inclusionary. City to buy more land to give to nonprofits. Encourage building in South Sunnyvale, starting with higher density for village centers. Build higher density, more affordable housing near transit. Eliminate parking requirements. Prioritize use of public land for deeply affordable housing. Create specific plans. All right, moving faster here. Partnering with housing choices to create set-aside units for people with developmental disabilities. Need to rezone, push for multifamily housing in resource-rich areas. For those who have developmental disabilities and only have Social Security, please have very low-income, affordable housing to accommodate their needs. Adopt Moffett Park-specific plan. Don't be afraid to build near public transportation. We have a couple here in Spanish. If someone wants to, if we could have our interpreter put that into the chat. Build different types of housing, duplex, fourplex, missing middle, EV chargers and all new builds. Universal income would be great with the pandemic, more mixed use units, residential, commercial. Pre-approved plans for accessory dwelling units like San Jose. How to stop people leaving, dilute high rents. Mixed use along El Camino Real and Matilda. Build housing on golf course. All right, do we have any more ideas that people want to share? And we will be documenting all of this as part of our meeting summary. So thank you for all your ideas and contributions. Looks like that. All right, I think that's everyone that's participating in the poll. Okay, do we want to pull up our next slide? All right, so I think at this point, we can take any questions if there are questions, and then I'd like to reserve a few minutes just to talk about next steps in the process and our schedule and the survey that we have available. Kevin and Jenny, are you seeing any questions in the Q&A that we want to answer?
I do see a few. There's a question here. How much buffer do we need to include?
I can answer that. There's no strict percentage or number of a buffer. It really depends on the local market that we're in. I would say roughly 20 to 30% additional capacity is a good target to aim for, to make sure that as higher density sites are built with market rate housing, that there's still opportunity sites for lower income housing. So 20 to 30% would be my rough answer to that.
All right. Let's see, I see another question here. Is the city's increased funding still loans, or are there any grants?
I can go ahead and take that one, Kevin. So the funding that the city puts out for the new construction or the preservation of affordable housing is in the form of a loan. We do offer other smaller grants for home rehab, maybe it's energy efficiency or ADA accessibility. So we have a variety of different programs, but primarily our biggest funding source for the new construction is our Housing Mitigation Fund loans.
All right, thank you, Jamie, I'm sorry, Jenny. I was going to ask Jamie if you could explain other options for how people can make comments.
Yes, if you would like to do a live comment, you can raise your hand. You'll see a hand if you're on the computer, you raise hand. If you're on a mobile device, you might have to hit 3 dots for more options. If you are calling in by phone, please hit *9 to raise your hand. And then when the host calls on you, you will get an audio prompt to unmute yourself and to begin to speak.
Okay, so maybe we could take 2 more of the Q&A questions and then move to our audience member who's on the phone.
Sure, I'll go ahead and take a couple of them. There's a few questions on here about applying for affordable housing in Sunnyvale. So I'll just touch briefly on rental versus ownership. So for rental housing in Sunnyvale that's affordable, there is a live-work preference for those who live or work in Sunnyvale. For those developments that are 100% affordable housing, you'll have to go visit each of those developments to learn about their wait list and their process for applying. You saw the income limits today on the screen. You can also find all of that information on the city's website. The units vary, so that some units are very low, some units are low income. So they're designated for those specific income levels. So if you qualify for one of those, you could live in one of those rental units. For our ownership, our below market rate or BMR program, those are for those who qualify in the moderate income category. So again, you saw those income limits tonight. All of the information to purchase a BMR home is also found on our website, but it is for first-time home buyers who also, again, live or work in Sunnyvale. And there's a variety of different income-related qualification items there. So if you have any more information, check out our website and don't ever hesitate to contact city staff.
Great, thank you, Jenny. Maybe someone from city staff could drop that link into the chat for everyone. That would be really helpful. All right, what other questions do we have here, Kevin or Jenny? I'm going to take one more and then we'll go to our phone participants.
Here's a question about the RENA. In terms of the site inventory, can the city designate a specific percentage of housing to very low income or low income?
For the sites inventory, we generally will identify any site that allows for 30 units per acre or greater as an opportunity site for very low or low income housing. That's what's called 30 units per acre is called the default density in state law. So that's our general approach to the inventory. Now the city does have the below market rate program, so the inclusionary requirement for new development to set aside a certain percentage of units for low and very low, but that's we're not really reflecting that directly in how we inventory sites. The income classification is really tied to the allowed density on the sites. I saw, all right, looks like, yeah, we have no raised hands, but we do have someone on the phone. Jamie, are you able to patch that person in to ask their question or make their comment?
Yeah, if they would like to make a comment, they are allowed to unmute themselves.
Okay, go ahead. All right, I can't, not hearing anything. If you are on the phone and you've indicated that you want to speak, just go ahead and let us know. But otherwise, I think we'll keep working our way through.
Hi.
Hi there. Great, thank you.
So
Welcome.
Chelsea, yeah, thanks for the nice presentation and your answer to the buffer of 20 to 30% doesn't seem to be enough. The city only requires developers to include 15% affordable housing, right, for any development. So that's likely the percentage that they will actually that will actually be built, because that's, you know, costs and all that. And you're planning to use all the numbers in the Lawrence Station plan and the El Camino plan and Moffett Park as affordable housing. So 15%, I would say 85. So it's almost like I'm thinking, I'm not, I can't do the math right now, but it's like 85%. It should be a buffer. The buffer should be 85% instead of 20 to 30%. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and we can look into that and make some recommendations as well. But I hear what you're saying around the inclusionary requirements versus the buffer. Yeah,
Right.
so thank you for that feedback.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, do we have any other raised hands? All right. Jenny or Kevin? Any other questions here?
Let's see, we have a handful, about half a dozen. Let's see. Question, will Sunnyvale plan for at least half of the very low income RENA to be affordable to extremely low income?
Yeah, so I can take that question. It's written into state law that the city needs to identify its extremely low income future housing needs as well. And so while the city is given a very low, moderate, and above moderate income RENA, we generally assume that about 50% of the very low income RENA, that very low income housing target, is our extremely low income housing target. And so we will describe that in the housing element, and we'll talk about the specific needs for people with extremely low income. And we'll also have to look at our programs, the city's programs, to address those needs. So yes, the answer is yes. Right. Jenny, did you see a question you wanted to address?
It looks like we have one question in Spanish, but our last question in English says, what are the barriers to increasing housing density? And I'll give a little bit of this answer, and Chelsea, feel free to chime in. But one of the barriers is that the city wants to look at increasing density on a larger scale. We're not looking at increasing on a parcel by parcel basis. So that's why we do really in-depth analysis for our specific plans and our area plans, like our downtown or Lawrence Station or El Camino, because we want to make sure that the density is for a larger area and it is accommodated by the resources around them, whether it's travel or transportation or grocery stores and things like that can accommodate the higher density of the residents. So one of the barriers, of course, is the time and the staffing and the energy it takes to prepare those documents before the council would eventually approve them. So as you might have heard tonight, we're working on a lot of those specific plans and we're looking at increasing the density in a lot of those areas, but we can only do so many at one time. So I would say that might be a barrier towards increasing density. And Chelsea, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think that's a great response, Jenny.
Great, thank you.
Okay. And we had a question in Spanish of what is the maximum income that can be applied for an apartment? That some say that maybe our Spanish translator could help interpret that question. I think they're saying that some people are passed over when they earn too little. All right, I'm not seeing our interpreters.
Chelsea, we do have a staff available who can translate it if our translators aren't available. Would you like me to have Edith work on that one?
That would be helpful, and maybe
okay.
The city can respond to that.
Great. Edith, if you're available, go ahead, and if you could read that question out loud for the group.
Sure, can you all hear me? ¿Me pueden escuchar todos bien?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So la pregunta es, ¿cuánto es el máximo de income, de ingresos que pueden aplicar para un apartamento? Porque algunos dicen que se pasan cuando uno gana muy poco. Ok. La respuesta es, hay 3 niveles de afordabilidad en el programa de rentas. Así es que hay 3 diferentes niveles y por eso es que son 3 listas. Una en el que pueden basar la renta a base de sus ingresos porque son tan bajos que no son siquiera parte del programa de Sunnyvale, sino es un subsidio del condado. Y hay 2 programas que son BMR de Sunnyvale y uno que se llama ARU, que son del 50% y más abajo. Y el otro que se llama BMR, que es el 80% y más abajo. Así es que son 3 listas posibles y por eso es que es posible que hayan aplicado a alguna lista que el ingreso sea más alto o de lo que ellos ganan o más bajo de lo que ellos ganan. Así es que hay que determinar primero a qué nivel están y de esa manera enfocarse en la lista de apartamentos de ese nivel. Si la persona quien fue Sandra Luz, si eso le aclaró y si no, puedo hablarle personalmente si quiere llamarme directamente por teléfono.
Great, thank you, Edith. Thank you very much for that information.
Okay.
All right, Jenny, do you want to take the next question?
Sure. So our next question says, if the RENA was not met for the expiring housing element or current housing element, how will that change to meet the newer goals? So I'll start on this one and then hand it over to Chelsea. So yes, for our current housing element, we have met our market rate or our above moderate income category, but we have not met our lower income categories. And as a reminder, the city is responsible to accommodate the housing, but unfortunately, we can't build it ourselves. So we rely on the developers and our nonprofit partners to help us meet those goals. So to meet our new lower income goals this cycle, you probably heard Chelsea talk a lot about making sure we have confidence in the sites that we're identifying in our inventory and ensuring that they will be developed in the next 8 years. Looking at new programs and policies, which is one of the main reasons we're here tonight to gather your feedback. And hopefully with the new creation of our specific plans that have higher density, we'll see higher rates of inclusionary, we'll see new land availability for affordable housing, which can all help chip away at that lower income goal. Chelsea, anything you want to add there?
No, that's great, Jenny. Thank you for that response.
Chelsea, I see a comment here. Not so much a question, but if anyone wants to add on to it, I'll read it for the audience. It's
Sure.
that the SSI income for those who have a severe disability is around $1,000 only, and the affordable rent for a very low income is about $1,400. Is it possible to check the reality and accommodate those who have severe disabilities and are unable to work? So I'd share that with the group.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. So part of what we need to look at in the housing element are programs for extremely low income residents. And so people that are on Social Security, on disability, fall into that extremely low income housing need.
And it looks like we have a question that I'll leave for Chelsea or maybe even Kim. The question is the land available in high opportunity areas to meet the requirements to build very low or low income units?
We'll be looking at that in the analysis we'll have details about the distribution of our inventory by opportunity areas. I would say generally that a lot of the infill housing, higher density opportunities are tend to be in the northern part of the city. It's classified, there are high resource areas, but also moderate and what's considered low resource areas. So we'll be looking at other strategies for increasing housing opportunities in high resource areas. It can be a little more challenging in more built out residential neighborhoods within the city, but we'll look at a suite of strategies. I know that there are some village centers in that portion of the city. We'll look at accessory dwelling units and other creative housing types, but it's certainly something we'll be discussing as we update this housing element. So thank you for that question.
Chelsea, I see another comment that might be helpful for the audience to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry, screen's moving. All right, it says one observation for the future. You'd suggested that individuals looking for lower income housing options should contact the individual developers or owners, and that the city's website can help. The suggestion is going one at a time to the developments is pretty inefficient and burdensome. This could interfere with the low income goals. Observation is, might the city consider creating an ombudsman role to help coordinate the efforts of the individuals looking for housing and the owners developers? A traffic manager / ombudsman's role might make this process much more efficient for all parties. And end of the comment.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Okay. Are we seeing any more questions or any raised hands? All right, well, maybe, and feel free to raise your hand if you have a question, something else that occurs to you, but maybe we can move to the final slides that talk about the schedule and next steps. All right. And so here's our overall schedule slide. We internally kicked off this project last fall, and we've been working to set up this community engagement program and start our analysis. We held a joint meeting with the Planning Commission and the Housing and Human Services Commission in December. And then we're here this week kicking off our broader community engagement program. So we had tonight's workshop. We'll also be having a second workshop in February 9th to be held in English and Chinese. That workshop will cover the same contents that we covered tonight. So if you're here tonight, if you want to hear this all over again, feel free to show up on February 9th, but we will be covering the same content. But please encourage your fellow community members to attend that meeting next week. Looking forward, we're aiming to have a public review draft of the housing element by early April. And then at that point, we will be back to the community at another community workshop where we'll present the more details of sites inventory and housing policies and programs, and we'll be looking for feedback from the community. We'll then take the draft along with the community's feedback to the commissions and the city council for their feedback before we submit the housing element to the state, to HCD, for their review. And HCD has 90 days for their initial review and then 60 days for each subsequent review. So that review period takes quite a bit of time. But once we've revised the housing element to address the state's comments, we'll be back to the commissions and the city council for adoption. And we're targeting to have the housing element adopted prior to the January 31st, 2023 deadline. And we'll be keeping the public apprised of any revisions that are made in the future, any opportunities for attending workshops or hearings or study sessions. So we hope that you'll continue to stay involved in all the upcoming engagement opportunities. Next slide, please. All right, so thank you all for being here tonight. If you haven't already visited the housing element webpage on the city's website, you can find that by going to sunnyvale.ca.gov and searching for the word housing element, and that'll pop right up. And there's an opportunity to sign up there to continue to receive more information on the project going forward. So again, thank you all for being here tonight. Next slide, please. I want to also just advertise, if you haven't already seen it, there's a community survey for the housing element that's available on the project website. It's available in English, in Spanish, and in Chinese. If you want to pull that up right now, you can hold your phone up and scan the QR code using your camera, or you can find the links online on the housing element webpage on the city's website. And this survey will be open until February 23rd. And then if some members of my team could also drop the links into the chat, and we'll provide a direct link there to where you can find these surveys. So you can use the survey to provide more input on the housing issues and potential solutions that you would like to see considered in the housing element update. So again, thank you all for taking the time to be here with us tonight, to share your feedback and your ideas and your comments. We really appreciate all of your participation. So thank you all very much. And the links to the survey are now in the chat if you want to take a minute to open that up and click on that link. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful evening.